Hello students, welcome to this English class. Let us start a prose text today. The text is The Portrait of a Lady by a famous Indian English writer Khushwant Singh. You know that Khushwant Singh is a very popular and rather famous writer in the world scenario. He was an Indian writer, although he has written a lot of work in English language which have an international acclaim. And here Khushwant Singh, as an Indian English writer, has scattered his experience to journalism, to novels, to short stories, to history and many things. He is a popular columnist and he is known for his famous weekly column with malice towards one and all. He was a regular writer, he was a columnist in the newspaper and he wrote under this title. He is very famous as a writer in the field of journals, in the field of history, in the field of literature and many other things. He is one of the finest historians, novelists, political commentators and critics of social life. In his works, you will find there is a reflection of social picture. You will find there is a reflection of history. In his writings, you will find there is also a reflection of politics, and he also made a critical analysis of the social life. And here is a text for you, that is a prose, and the name of the prose is The Portrait of a Lady. The very caption is very much eloquent of the content. What it contains? You know, the title of a work of art should be like the signboard of a shop. It should be apt and suggestive. It should tell you the contents of the shop. When you read the signboard of a shop, you should be able to know what it contains. It should guide you towards a right direction. Thereby, you can go into the shop and purchase things. And if the signboard is illusory, you will not be able to know the things. It may attract the things, it may attract the people, it may attract the customers, but if the signboard does not tell you the contents of the shop, you will fail. Therefore, the very title here, the caption that he has chosen for his topic is very suggestive, very apt. The title tells you that it is something about a lady, and here it is a portrait. The picture, the writing is in the form of a picture. You will see how when the writing goes, when the text goes, you will see how a kind of image will be formed in your mind. Several things will come to your mind and an image will be created therein, and you will actually enjoy the things that he writes. Do you enjoy your grandmother's company, the students? Yes, grandmothers are very interesting characters, aren't they? Yes, they are. Grandmothers are very interesting characters. Your parents may scold you, your parents may tell you, they may rebuke you, scold you, they may use biting and caustic words against you, but grandparents are very much interesting characters. They only love children, they love their grandchildren. They know and learn only how to love. Parents are administrators, but grandparents are lovers. They love the children, they love the grandchildren, and grandparents are very interesting characters, and everybody loves his grandparents. Is a grandmother a good companion? If such a question is asked to you, the students, it is quite natural and obvious that you must feel that grandmother is always a very good companion. He is the rather by far the best companion among the people that you come and meet. So, she is a very good companion. And let us see here what Khushwant Singh tells you about the grandmother, the portrait that he gives, the picture that he portrays, the picture that he colors here about the grandmother. So, grandmother is a very interesting character, and let us see how he describes grandmother as an interesting character. Khushwant Singh is, you know, a very humorous writer. He makes his writing very interesting. When you will read his writings, you will see how he leaves a kind of humor that interests and ennobles the reader, and he is very much humorous in the beginning. You know, the kind of relationship between a grandmother and a grandson, they crack jokes, and here when he describes about the activities of the grandmother, about the grandmother and about himself, he becomes very much humorous in the beginning when he describes his grandmother. And he starts that in the unit 1 of the text. He says, my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. You mark the sentence. My grandmother, like everyone's grandmother, was an old woman. It is very natural. Grandmother is always an old woman, and he says, my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother. It is a comparison. He gives a simile here, and when he says about the grandmother, you know, a kind of picture, a kind of image comes to the eyes, comes to the mind of the reader. Grandmother, the image of a grandmother. Grandmother is old, and my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. He continues, people said, he has learnt it from the people. He has come to know about his grandmother from the people. He has listened to the people say that she had once been young and pretty. She was once been young and pretty, and even had a husband. Is it not humorous to say like this? She was very old, as old as the other women, as other grandmothers, and people said that she was once young and pretty, and she had a husband. It is but natural. If she did not have any husband, how is it possible that he is the grandson? So, she must have a husband, and she must have a son who happened to be his the grandson's father. So, people said that she had once been young and pretty, and even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. You see, people said that she had once been young and pretty and even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. It was hard to believe, it was difficult to believe that she had a husband. Grandmother had a husband, and he says, people said she was once young and pretty. It is natural she was young one day, and she was also pretty, he says. People said she was pretty. Pretty means attractive. There is a difference between pretty and beautiful. Pretty is attractive, beautiful is the better form of pretty, and pretty is less than beautiful. Beautiful is a stronger term. When you say beautiful, means it is a stronger term than pretty. Pretty is just attractive, the look attracts, but beautiful means it is better than pretty. And people said that she was once young and pretty and even had a husband, but that was very hard to believe that she had a husband. And you see, pretty and beautiful are not synonymous terms. We can't use pretty for the word beautiful, and we can't replace beautiful by pretty. They can't be interchangeable, because pretty is attractive, beautiful is a stronger term, is more prettier. And here Kushan Singh makes reflections of the past, and he often told us the games she used to play as a child. She often told us the games she used to play as a child. Grandmother, grandmothers tell stories to the children. Grandmothers are good at telling stories to the children. Children feel very much interesting. Children feel very amusing. Children will feel very happy because they listen to stories told by the grandmothers. Grandmothers are always symbols of telling stories to the children, and often told us the games. She also told about the games that she played or she used to play as a child in the past. Therefore, she was also a recollection of the past. He talks about his grandfather also. His grandfather has become a photograph. That means she had lost her husband. Her husband was dead. Grandfather was dead. She was a photograph, and photograph of the grandfather, it hung in the drawing room over a mantelpiece. The portrait, the photograph of his grandfather hung in the drawing room over a mantelpiece, and the physical description of the grandfather is also given here. Grandfather is a very interesting character, and he says he wore big turban and loose fitting clothes. He had a long white beard covered the base part of his chest. So his beard was white. So it seemed that he was also very old. Although he has become a photograph, by the time he died, he was very old at the time. Therefore, he was dead, and nothing is told about him. Yes, dear students, let us see what Kushan Singh says about his grandfather. He gives a brief description about his grandfather. As he says about his grandfather, in the whole text you will know about his grandmother, but here just he gives a glimpse of his grandfather. He says his grandfather was a photograph. His photograph was hanging in the drawing room over a mantelpiece. He wore a big turban because he was a Sikh. He wore a big turban and loose fitting clothes. He had a long white beard covered the base part of his chest. White beard, it means the beard was white, means he was old, and it covered the base part of his chest. The whole chest was covered with the white beard of his grandfather, and grandfather was an old man. If you discuss the grammatical possibilities of these things here, the usage of adjectives, you see, as rules of grammar, we use adjective of size first, then comes adjective of color. First adjective of size, then comes adjective of color, and Kushan Singh rightly uses the two adjectives in a right way, and he says white, long beard. You can't say long white beard, grammar says no. So, you have to see, this is also a rule of grammar, to use whenever you use it in your sentence, when you come across two adjectives like this, a size and a color, the adjective of size goes first, then follows the adjective of color. So, white, long, beard is not possible. We have to say long, white, beard. And you see, dear students, now telling this thing about his grandfather, he comes back to his grandmother again. He describes his grandmother's looks, how she looked like. the appearance of his grandmother, how she was like. He looked, his grandfather looked at least 100 years old. He becomes humorous about his grandfather. He looked at least 100 years old, very old in his photograph, and he did not look to have a wife and a children. You see, look at the sentence, he says, he did not look to have a wife and a children. Very interesting, very absurd also. He did not look to have a wife and children. How is it? But the next line makes it clear how interesting it is. He says, but he looked to have lots and lots of grandchildren. He did not look to have children, a wife or children, but he looked to have a lot of grandchildren. That means he was looked very old. The description, you look at the description, the sentence, the kind of sentence he writes to make the sentence humorous and interesting. Yes, dear students. Now, come back to the grandmother. How the grandmother looked like, the appearance of the grandmother, how she appeared. She was short, fat, and slightly bent. This also tells volumes of age. She was also old. He has already made it clear in the initial line of the sentence. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. So, she was old. So, two other things are also added to it. She was short, she was tall. She was not a tall woman, she was a short woman, short in stature, not so tall. She was a fat, she looked fat, she was a fat woman, and she was slightly bent. And slightly bent means she stooped forward, she was bending forward, because it happens due to old age. When somebody becomes old, he or she bends, it is a stooping forward posture. Yes, dear students, she was short, fat, and slightly bent forward, and her face was criss-cross of wrinkles, running from everywhere to everywhere. You again mark the sentence. Her face was criss-cross of wrinkles. You will find wrinkles on her face because of old age, and the wrinkles ran from everywhere to everywhere, from this side to that side, this side to that side to this side, and the wrinkles went on from different sides. So, it was a criss-cross of wrinkles, the face was like that. She was so terribly old. She seemed to have stayed at the same age for 20 years, not just pretty, but always beautiful. The students, you see how he manages the sentences. She was terribly old, and she seemed to have stayed at the same age for 20 years. The grandson sees him in the same age, as if she looked the same for 20 years, and not just pretty. And now he says, people said she was pretty, she was young and pretty. People said, but now the writer says, Khushwant says, not just pretty, she was always beautiful. You see, he says, my grandmother was very beautiful, she was not pretty. What people said, he did not believe in that, but he believed that his grandmother was beautiful, not only pretty. He says about his grandmother's dress, the kind of clothes she used, and he says, she was in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop. She was in spotless white. Her dress was spotless white, no spot was there, spotless without spot, thoroughly white dress. She was in her white, and one hand resting on her waist, because she was stooping forward, to balance her stoop. She was giving one hand on the waist, to balance herself, and on the other side of the other hand, he only told the beads of her rosary. He was telling the beads of the rosary because she was a pious woman. It tells that she was a pious lady, she was a religious minded woman, and she always said the prayer. She always told the beads of the rosary, and therefore, she was a very pious lady. This is the kind of dress we know, and let us see the key words here. Spotless means without any spot, stoop means forward bending, and pale means colorless or colorless, pale, and you will come across another word, puckered, wrinkled. Yes, dear students, Khushwant Singh tells about his grandmother in a vivid way, and you will come to know about the dress, you come to know about her age, you come to know about the kind of person she looked like, and she told about the games during the fast, and she had a husband, and the grandfather's photograph was hanging over the mantelpiece in the drawing room. You know that we had a discussion on the grandmother in the text, The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh, and Khushwant Singh tells you about her grandmother, how she was an old woman, like everybody's grandmother. She was an old woman. People said that she was young and pretty, and it was very hard to believe that she had a husband. He talks about his grandfather, that his grandfather's portrait, photograph hung on the mantelpiece in the drawing room, and his grandfather looked as if he was 100 years. He looked very old. He put on a turban, a big turban, and his long white beard covered the best part of his chest. He did not look to have a wife and children. He looked to have a lot of grandchildren. Very interesting. And he said that the grandmother put on white clothes, dress. She was always in her spotless white, and she was short, fat, and bent, slightly bent. She was a religious minded woman. She was a pious woman. One hand was resting on her waist to balance the stoop, and the other hand, in her other hand, she engaged herself in telling the beads of our rosary. This is what we know about the grandmother in the previous discussion, and let us see how he continues about his grandmother. Again, about his hairstyle, he says, her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale puckered face. Her silver locks, here locks means hair, silver locks means silver is white in color, and say white locks means white hair. Her silver locks were scattered here and there on the scattered untidily here and there over her pale, the face looked pale, colorless. Puckered face, puckered means wrinkled, puckered, wrinkled, face was wrinkled. See, he has already told it that wrinkles ran from everywhere to everywhere on her face, and the lips were constantly moved in inaudible prayer, and the lips were always engaged in saying the prayer of God. So, from this we come to know that she was a very religious minded lady, a very pious lady, and she grandmother was also a simile, a comparison. Simile, what is a simile? We not only use simile in poetry, we also use a simile in prose, and here he also uses it in the prose. In his prose, the portrait of a lady, Khushwant Singh uses simile. Simile means comparison of dissimilar objects. it is a comparison of dissimilar objects. Objects are dissimilar, but we can compare, because there are certain similarities. I mean the face of a girl and the face of a moon. It sometimes poets sometimes compare the face of a girl to that of the moon. This is a comparison. We use like Raj for the comparison, and here also the writer compares his grandmother. How he says, look at the sentence here. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. She looked like the winter landscape in the mountains. Why winter landscape? Because in winter in the mountains, particularly he talks about, because you know that he was a man of Punjab, and Punjab is in the North India, and during winter season we find it is closer to the Himalayas, and therefore, you see it was in the cold region, and therefore, snowfall is there, and during winter season the whole landscape looked white, and therefore he compares and gives a simile that she was like the winter landscape in the mountains. In the mountains, you will see the mountain was covered with snow, looked thoroughly white, and she also looked white. The hair was, say it was a silver locks, means white hair. She was, her body, I mean her dress was also white, spotless white dress, and therefore she looked like, a comparison is here, like the winter landscape in the mountains, and she was the pure white serenity. She was the pure white. White stands for some purity. White means the color stands for purity, and pure white serenity, serenity calmness, breathing peace and contentment, and she was symbol of peace, and she was also symbol of contentment, satisfaction. She was pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. And you look at the things, the description he gives about his grandmother. So, grandmother in this text we come to know about the grandmother, and grandmother was looked very pure, she looked very white, and she looked very interesting, and grandmother was an interesting character, and in this text we come to know about grandmother's life, grandmother's appearance, grandmother's looks. Grandmother, he says, grandmother and I were good friends. In this text we come to know that grandmother and I were good friends. Again it is a grammatical structure. Can you say I and grandmother? Can we say I and grandmother were good friends? Again grammar says no. Here there is also a point of grammar. Grandmother and I were good friends, because the first person is not used first in a sentence. When we have more than one persons used as the subjects of the sentence, the first person always comes last, and the third person here, since we have two persons, one is grandmother, it is the third person, and I the first person, and we can't say I and the grandmother, we must have to say grandmother and I. This is also maintained by Khushwant Singh, and he says grandmother and I were good friends. It is but natural that grandmother and a grandson and granddaughter as well, they are very close. Children feel very much close to their grandparents than to the parents, because parents are strict people, parents are strict administrators, they try to administer the children, but grandparents they only love. Love is the only alternative that is there for them, and they love the children, they want to be with the children, they tell stories to the children, they tell about the games and all that they have played during the time when they were young, little children. This is what we know, and the writer tells about his grandmother's mother this way. Students, let us resume the story, resume the lifestyle, the kind of relationship the grandmother and the grandchild had in the unit 2 of the text, the portrait of a lady. You know, grandma and the boy, they were very close friends. Here the parents left him with her when they went to live in the city. Parents left the child with the grandmother in the village, because the parents went to the city. He gives a very beautiful description in this text about the city life and the country life, the village life and the city life. He also juxtaposes 3 kinds of people of 3 generations. One is old generation, the other is elderly generation, and the next is the younger generation. 3 generations are put vis-a-vis by the writer. 3 generations are here. One is a very the younger generation, because the writer stands for the younger generation. The elderly generation means his parents, and the old generation, the grandmother. The writer Khushwant Singh here keeps 3 important generations for us: the old generation, the middle generation, and the younger generation. And he says, parents left me with her when they went to live in the city. When father and mother went to live in the city, they left me with grandmother. And what did grandmother do? All the responsibilities laid on the shoulders of, on the weak, frail, fragile shoulders of the grandmother. Woke me up in the morning, got me ready for school. She woke him up in the morning. He used to go to the village school. You think of the time when Khushwant Singh was a little child, and in those days it was India was being ruled by the English people, and the educational system was not so developed at the time. As you find schools in villages today, you won't find schools in those days, and it was very ancient times. During this period, when the little boy went to school, the child or the boy was woken up by the grandmother in the morning, and she also got him ready for school. This responsibility was there with the grandmother. My grandmother, he says, was an interesting character, and she was a responsible lady. She woke me up in the morning to go to the school with. And when he went to the school, before going to school, the child was made ready by the grandmother, and she said her morning prayer in a sing-song, while she bathed and dressed the boy so that he would learn it. When the child was bathed by the grandmother, and while he was being dressed by the grandmother, the lady, the old lady, grandma, said the morning prayer in a sing-song voice, so that there is a purpose. Grandmother wanted that the boy should learn the prayer. You see, this is the responsibility of an old woman. This is the responsibility of a grandmother. How a grandmother wanted that the new generation should learn something from the elderly generations, and she belongs to the old generation, and the older values have to be inculcated by the younger generations, and therefore, she wanted to say the prayer while she bathed and dressed the boy for school, because she wanted that the boy should learn the prayer, because prayer is a very important part of life. In India, it is a part of Indian culture. In our Indian culture, what happens? We learn prayer, and every day we have to pray God in the morning and in the evening. And when even we go to school, there is also prayer class. We have to pray. Prayer is an important part of our system, of our life, of our culture. Therefore, the writer tells that the grandmother wanted to sing the prayer, say the prayer in a louder way, so that the boy should learn the prayer. This is what she wanted to do. Grandparents are old values, and the old values have to be transferred to the younger generations. You see, the kind of school materials they used in the past during at the time. Nowadays, when you go to school, yes, a bag is given to you. Your parents bring pen, paper, coffee, books, and all that, and other writing materials. Everything was kept in a bag with a water bottle, and the whole bag mounts on the little child, and the child drags himself forward with a heavy bag nowadays. But at the time, he talks about the kind of education and the kind of writing materials or school materials that were used in those days. He says, wooden slate pre-washed and pre-plastered with yellow chalk. You know, slate was used in the past. There was a wooden slate, and it was washed properly before the child went to school. The slate was properly washed, and it was plastered with yellow chalk, so that something can be written on it. When the white chalk will run on it, the the writings will be visible properly. And another material was there. He carried an earthen ink pot. Ink pot was also used in those, because you know fountain pens were not there at the time. It was an earthen ink pot. He had to carry an ink pot with him, a pot filled with ink, and he also carried a reed pen. No fountain pen was not there at the time. He carried a reed pen, and the reed pen was dipped in the ink, and it was used for writing on the slate. And therefore, this is a kind of material, school material used in those days. And all the things, the slate, wooden slate, the earthen ink or reed pen, all these three items were tied together in a bundle. The grandmother did all these things. She tied everything in one bundle, and the child had to carry these things to the school in those days. What about the breakfast? You see, it was a thick stale chapati with a little butter and a sugar spread on it. A thick chapati. It was thick as well as stale. Stale means it was reserved from the previous night. It was made by grandmother in the previous night, and some chapatis were preserved for the next day, so that the child would eat a piece of a thick and stale chapati before going to school. And this was the breakfast, a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it. This was the breakfast for the child. She carried some chapatis for the village dogs also. You see how benevolent she was. She not only felt concern for her own grandson, she also felt concern for the other animals in the locality. And when she went to school with the boy, she carried some chapatis for the village dogs. She felt concern for the dogs also. And you see how benevolent she was, how kind she was for the village dogs also. So, why did grandma go with the boy to the school? She had a purpose also. She not only made the grandson ready for school, she also accompanied the grandson to the school. She also went with the grandson to the school. What is the purpose? She had a very noble purpose. What was that? It is because the school was attached to the temple. The school was attached to the temple, and you know, she was a pious lady. As the school was attached to the temple and she was a pious lady, she wanted to accompany the boy to the school. So that when the child and others, I mean the children, would be busy reading things, studying things in the school, as the school was attached to the temple, she would sit inside reading the scriptures, reading the religious books in the temple. This was the purpose of the lady, and how she was a very religious minded woman. And what was the teaching method at the time? You know, the students, you compare the kind of schooling in the past and the kind of schooling at present. Past and present can be compared, and here Kushan Singh tells you about the past and present. Two important generations are kept here with you, and the kind of education that was there at the time. And when the grandmother went to the school with the child, and her purpose was to sit inside the temple, so that she would be able to read the scriptures, the holy books in the temple. This was the purpose of the grandmother, and the grandmother wanted to go that. And this kind of schooling I am talking about. The children sat in rows on either side of the veranda. The children had to sit on either side of the veranda, and the priest taught alphabet and morning prayer in a chorus, and the priest was the teacher. The priest of the temple was teaching the students, the children in the this was the school. You know, there is no institution as such. There was no institution as such for the children in those days. No educational institution, no building was there for the children, and the children had to sit in the veranda on either side of the veranda, and the priest taught alphabet to the children along with morning prayer, and the children learned these things in a chorus. And when grandmother and the boy returned together, the village dogs followed them to their home, growling and fighting for chapatis. It is but natural. When you throw chapatis to the dogs, they quarrel with one another. That happened. This is what we know about the grandmother. The grandmother is a very she is not only pure white to look at, she was also very interesting, and she was also a very religious minded woman, and the religious, all these things are rolled into one, and the grandmother was a religious minded woman, and she loved children, she loved dogs, and she loved everything, and therefore grandmother was a very interesting character. Dear students, thank you very much.